Hello, good people. This is our second day of reading for the affirmative side on the education. And I'll just go quickly through a summary of basic advantages that you can find in these readings and a little bit on some of the potential rebuttals. Remember, on this Thursday, we will have a WebEx meeting where we will go over other rebuttals. We'll just sort of brainstorm together on those rebuttal days. The GEE reading, GEE, is mostly an advantage about video games. And he's a very famous author that writes about the educational benefits of video games. Um, First of all, he says that video games teach problem solving skills. So you have a goal and you have to figure out like how to achieve that goal, what the problem is, what you need to overcome, etc. And by doing so, it teaches us sort of to think like a scientist, because what a scientist often does, like in a science experiment, is create a simulation of something that's going on in the world and then testing that simulation. And Guy's making the argument that in video games, the same thing happens. The video game is a simulation, and you go through and you test what works and what doesn't work in that simulation. So we're sort of forming hypotheses and testing those hypotheses when we're playing games, and therefore games teach us to think like scientists. In fact, Guy argues that simulations are how the brain works in general. That when we're thinking something through, we often create sort of mental images or mental simulations. He uses that marriage example. You've never been to a wedding before, and so you create sort of a simulation of what the wedding is like in your head as a way to think through how you're going to behave and what you're going to do while you're at the wedding. But certainly, think about, I think a better example might have been like a job interview, right? When you think about what questions they might ask and how you might respond to them. And so games work the same way that our brains work, so they're beneficial for our brains. It also teaches us, he says, to look for affordances. That is, what things in the video game world allow us to do things, allow us to, afford us certain possibilities. And that's something that we do sort of through trial and error in a video game, and the same thing in the world around us, right? If you have a repair on your house that you need to take care of, you might look around with the materials that you have and say, okay, what do these materials afford me? How can I solve this problem? Video games also teach us to collaborate with one another. And in fact, he talks about how gaming communities often form learning communities. If any of you are gamers or avid gamers, you might be a member of some of these learning communities where you go to a message board or you follow someone on Twitch or something like that, and you read about the game and you study the game and you learn through one another, which is obviously a valuable skill for life as well, learning from one another. And one great advantage of all of this is that video games promote situational learning. That is, instead of abstract learning where we're just sort of memorizing information and divorced from any concrete action or consequences, video games put you in a situation and you have to learn by being in that situation. And Guy talks about how this is, studies on education and stuff show that that's the way people learn the best, right? Instead of, just telling you, for instance, how chemistry works, this molecule bonds to that molecule, etc. We do an experiment in class, right? And that situation, that experiment, makes the lessons stick better than if it was just taught to us abstractly. And finally, games are highly motivating as well, right? Games are fun. Games are almost addictive to a certain extent. So people will spend more time and more effort learning via video games than they might learning by reading or taking quizzes or something like that. The other advantages we'll talk about here, the three of them, are the three chapters from the Thompson reading. So they all come from Thompson. The first is the public thinking advantage. And the basic idea here is that because of the internet, we're doing a lot of thinking in public, with other people watching us. Particularly, we're writing a lot on the internet, right? We're writing comments, we're writing replies, we're writing our own tweets and posts. Um, and Thompson makes the point that in the past, after school was over, most people didn't write anything in their lives. But now everyone is engaged in writing on the internet. He says there's more than the Library of Congress written on the internet every single day. And writing is beneficial for thinking because writing helps us distill our thoughts. And as we write something out, what sort of a vague idea becomes more firm, more concrete, more well thought through. Writing, in fact, is one of the most valuable thinking tools there is. And so it's great that we have all this writing going on. And in particular, because we're writing for an audience, what sociologists call the audience effect takes place, where we hold ourselves to higher standards. So our writing and our thinking is even stronger because we're doing it for an audience, right? If you're writing a paper just for a class, you're not really too worried about those ideas getting out. You're not really that embarrassed if you don't do that great on that. But if you're writing for all of your friends and family, a post on Facebook, then you might be more worried and therefore, focus on it more. He talks also in this chapter about the theory of multiples. The theory of multiples is the idea that a lot of people have the same great ideas at the same time. So, like evolution, for instance, Charles Darwin gets credited with that, but there were multiple people at that time that were basically advancing the same idea. And it's an interesting question, right? Like, why do all these people in different places, maybe some of whom don't even know each other, come up with the same ideas at about the same time? And a lot of that has to do with the way ideas spread through networks, right? It's sort of, we might say it's like in the air, right? Like people are buzzing and talking about these things. And now we have these vast social networks online. So ideas emerge and spread and are in the air a lot more because of these networks. So again, this is making the world a smarter place. We're also, writing in public and debating one another, and debates themselves help sharpen our minds, sort of the idea of iron sharpens iron. He also makes the point that, while a lot of times online we do this pretty quickly and we don't really, think about it as in a long, sort of deep, contemplative way that you might if you were, like, say, writing a book. He says there's no necessary trade-off between those things, right? You can write a book and engage in that sort of slow type of thinking and also engage in this public thinking online. There's also some good arguments in here that are responses to the notion that there's a lot of repellent speech online. You see trolls and name calling and stuff like that. And he talks about how that's not always the case, and there's ways to contain those things as responses to that. So A2 is my abbreviation for answers to. So answers to the rebuttal that there's a lot of disgusting and repellent speech online. The next chapter is the new literacies chapter, and this is again an advantage that the affirmative can offer. Just the idea that all of these tools and technologies that we have teach us new literacies, and there's some benefit to those new literacies. So besides the 3, reading, writing, arithmetic, we have all of these new types of literacies, right? We have tools that allow us to visualize and manipulate data. So he used the example of gerrymandering and using a computer software program to redraw districts, voting districts in a more fair way. And he also used the example of word clouds, or what are called wordles. And what those do is help you visualize your own writing and what words maybe you're overusing and what words are really important or central. So it can help improve your writing by giving you sort of a visual of what you're writing. Obviously, video and image literacy with things like Photoshop and video editing tools, etc. We can make our own images, and therefore we become more familiar with the tactics and techniques that people use with images to try to persuade us, right? So we understand about cuts and fades and frames, etc., much better because we have access to these tools much more. He talks about how the word processor means that we revise more. If you were writing a paper by hand or on a typewriter, you might be reticent to revise because you'd have to go back and type that page again or use whiteout or something like that. But with the word processor, it made revision so easy that people revised their writing more. So it even improved some of the old literacies like writing. Also, things like how-to videos out there help us learn from others. He actually mentions this TED Talk by a person named Chris Anderson that you might want to look up. It's actually about dance videos, and how the competitive dance community has really exploded in the past 10 years, mostly because of YouTube, because people could share videos of them doing certain steps, and then people would learn those steps and build off of one another and learn more steps, etc. And how now there are dancers out there doing moves that people thought were impossible or never knew were possible because of this ability to share how-to videos. And of course, this extends way beyond dance, right? To repairing your house, repairing your car, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that you might want to do, there's probably a how-to video out there for it. And I thought this quote towards the end of the chapter was a really good way to impact this advantage if you're thinking about making it. He says, all literacies are useful to dabble in, even if you never master them. They open your eyes to the world around you. Learning to write, even clumsily, teaches us to appreciate writing done well. By learning to play an instrument, we gain a deeper appreciation of true virtuosity. The same holds with design. And here he's talking about graphic design and computer design. Okay, and then the final advantage here is the notion of ambient awareness. And this is just the idea, basically, that because of like our social media and whatnot, that we're sort of more ambiently aware, of the world around us. Ambient like the air around us, right? We sort of just breathe it in. Whether we're actually looking for that information and seeking it out and devouring it, we're kind of inhaling it and breathing it in, regardless. And so that's sort of, in his claim, is sort of making us all a little more aware and a little more worldly than we would have been before, right? So he describes it like picking up the feel of the room, but now the room is the whole world, and it circulates on our social media, and we're sort of picking up, what's going on and what people are feeling and talking about out there. So social networks are really responsible for expanding this ambient awareness. He makes an interesting point that, each individual post or one individual post might be pretty meaningless or silly, trivial, but overall, kind of accumulatively, of all the posts that are out there, we're more aware of the world around us. We're more aware of what's going on with our friends. We're more aware of what's going on in our city. We're more aware of what's going on in our government, etc. He has some good responses to most social media posts are vapid or narcissistic on there. And he's like, yeah, sure, 90% of them probably are, but that's always been true. Most writing has always been vapid and narcissistic. And the advantage of social media is it also makes us aware of, ambient aware of the important stuff and the more profound stuff. This also saves us time, right? So we're not like, every time you see a friend that you haven't seen in a while, you don't have to, get all the updates on what's going on in their life because you're sort of ambiently aware of that via your social media. Or the same thing with the news, right? Every time a new issue comes up, a new bill gets debated on Congress, you don't have to learn everything new again for the first time because you've already have some ambient awareness of it. In general, weak ties, that is people that aren't super close friends or family, but more like acquaintances, etc., enhance our access to knowledge, right? If you've ever seen anybody on Facebook or Twitter or something say, hey, I want to crowdsource this Anybody out there know anything about medicine? Um, right? And if you only are able to talk to your close friends and family, and none of them are doctors or know any doctors, then you don't really have access to that knowledge. But with social media, because we have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of weak ties, if you ask that question, you're likely to get 10 people responding saying, "Yeah, my wife's a doctor. What do you need to know?" Etc. So just access to knowledge overall has increased because of social media. Um, this is true for news and politics as well. Like the idea these days that the news finds us, right? In the past, you had to order a newspaper, so you had to go find the news. But now, whether you really are a news junkie or not, there's going to be some of that circulating on your social media, and you'll have some ambient awareness of it regardless. Maybe this is part of the reason why people say that the young people today are more aware, more politically aware, more politically savvy than past generations. And that's because, even from an early age, you've been kind of ambiently exposed to these issues. And it also motivates us more to be informed and be aware because when we know sort of that when we post that someone's watching, right? And so therefore, again, like the public thinking advantage, when eyes are on us, we're more motivated to make sure we're saying something intelligent. So there's more rebuttals than the ones I'm going to go over here, and hopefully we can come up with some of those on Thursday, but I'm just going to list a main one or two for each of these advantages. So video games, I think you can talk about the harms of video games. Their addictive nature maybe trades off with schoolwork in other ways. Learning harmful lessons like sexism and violence in video games. And also questioning how much we're really learning. Yes, video games teach some basic problem-solving skills and whatnot, but are those really that important, those basic problem-solving skills, if we're not, learning our schoolwork or, learning critical thinking in a deeper way? For the public thinking advantage, there have been other ways to get public thinking for a long time, whether it be your church group or social group talking about politics or social issues, etc. That public thinking is something that's not unique to the internet, and the internet also can encourage. Because of public thinking, we're all like trying to get attention, right? We want people to pay attention to what we said, and because of that, it encourages us to be sensationalistic, maybe a little extremist or hyperbolic, or even snarky. So all of those sort of negatives of internet discourse that we see a lot could be rebuttals to this public thinking argument. He says the true intellectual work is going on in the comments, but there's that famous counter saying about the internet that says never read the comments, right? Because the comments are going to be so filled with vile and disgusting things that it's not worthwhile to read the comments. So that's sort of a good rebuttal to this argument. The new literacies advantage, I think you can question what's the value of new literacies, like how much value is there really in me knowing how to edit a photograph or put a filter on a photograph. Like is that really going to make a huge difference in my life, compared to like being a very good reader or a very good writer or a very good critical thinker. And there's a potential trade-off, a time trade-off with old literacies, right? If you're spending all your time doing video editing, then you're probably not spending a lot of time reading books and thinking that way, and so that could be harmful. And then finally, ambient awareness. It sounds good in practice, but in a lot of ways, what we need is true awareness or deep awareness, not ambient awareness, right? Ambient awareness is sort of a shallow awareness. Like I'm vaguely familiar with debates about police brutality, or I'm vaguely familiar with debates about gun control, but I'm not really, familiar with those arguments. I'm not really familiar with what the bills, or what's contained in the bill. And so we can get misinformation via ambient awareness and even confusion, right? I think things like conspiracy theories and propaganda can thrive in an environment where we're sort of paying attention out of one eye, but not really focused on something. Um, and that's a world where misinformation can really thrive. So again, we'll see everyone on Thursday, and there'll also be the Education Negative 2 video to watch before Thursday, and we'll try to brainstorm some more potential rebuttals to these advantages at that time. All right, have a good day.